I'll be like, okay, I've already had two, so but I just want a taste of that one, so I'll pull a piece off and I'll eat just the piece, and then I'll have another piece, and then I'll end up eating 3 donuts.
Welcome, everyone, to the Fun Money Podcast. We're glad you're here. I'm one of your hosts, Ross Powell.
And I'm the other, Josh Hargrove. Good to have you back.
Yes. Good to engage in this conversation. We had a little bit of this and just decided to hit record so that we could pick up the rest of the conversation. But just zooming backwards a little, today we're talking about debt.
Yes, debt.
Is debt good? Is debt bad? Should you have debt? How should you approach it?
Yeah.
And at various levels of wealth, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Just having the conversation. Some of it's going to be numbers and analysis related, and some of it's going to be not.
Yeah. So, first of all, happy belated Father's Day, my
thank
friend.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know you are a dad.
I am a dad.
As am I. So
happy Father's Day to you as well. You wanted to return.
Yeah.
I got you. I got you.
And happy belated Father's Day to all of the fathers out there. Ross, should you eat donuts? Are donuts good or bad?
Okay, so if I'm going to spend my calories and I'm going to spend my insulin as a type 1 diabetic,
okay,
there are some donuts that are worth it.
Oh.
And there are some donuts that are not worth it.
Okay,
so
what's a worth it donut to you?
It's the maple cream filled donut.
Maple cream filled, like
from the corner shop. It's not
the
like
size one.
Yeah, the Long John.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I gotcha. Eclair is right.
Yes.
I've heard the Long John. I think that might be something different. I don't know. Okay, yeah.
It might be something different, but
the long rectangular
yes,
shaped. You have get the cream in there,
with
maple on top. That sounds like a winner.
Not whipped cream, but the
Bavarian cream.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's my favorite donut.
Yeah.
Of all time, followed closely second by the apple fritter with the clusters and the glaze.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
2 non-traditional donuts, but
rarely
if I'm going to spend my sugar, if I'm going to spend my insulin, spend my calories on something that is in the donut category, it's going to be one of those 2.
Yeah, very nice. Rarely have I ever had a donut that I have not enjoyed. I have a weakness for donuts. I love them. I love a good pastry, and so being that it was Father's Day, my wife treated me to some donuts.
Oh,
so that's what we had for breakfast on Sunday.
What's your go-to?
Yeah, I don't. So probably like at the local donut shop, I always get the pink one, which I think is cherry. I think it's
oddly
cherry.
Not strawberry or something like that. But
I'm not really sure. And what's funny, I don't normally like cherry stuff, but that whatever the pink donut is, I love that one. And then I'll probably follow that up with just a regular glazed. Although this past weekend I had a maple donut.
Okay.
To follow it up.
Welcome to the club.
And then a glazed. And what I'll do, I'll be like, okay, I've already had 2, so but I just want a taste of that one, so I'll pull a piece off and I'll eat just the piece, and then I'll have another piece, and then I'll end up eating 3 donuts. But only one piece at a time.
You got no
so I think the
self-control
calorie
to get
division
that
works
one.
out differently when you do it that way.
Maybe.
Come on.
It's
Help me
less just looking at, because I've got the Dexcom tracker, and so I know what my blood sugar is every 5 minutes. So if you spread it out, the peak is less severe.
Yeah. So why are we talking?
But you're still eating the same amount of calories.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I know.
Okay, Josh. Why are we talking about donuts on the Fun Money Podcast?
Well, because I think that it's a good, you can relate that to this topic of debt, because a lot of times the language that we use when we are talking about debt includes words like good and bad. Is debt good or is it bad? Or is there even such a thing as good debt? Should you or shouldn't you go into debt for something?
Do you feel guilty around
the
debt that you have?
Is
the
it okay
donut that you ate?
sometimes maybe you can have donuts in moderation? Can you have debt in moderation? So I thought it would be helpful for us to have a little bit of back and forth dialogue around this particular topic. And part of where this is coming from, just for some context, is I started teaching a personal finance class out of our home just for some basically some family friends, students. Our kids go to this to a private school. Long story short, my wife said, "Hey, do you want to teach our kids a personal finance class?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds great." And she said, "Great, maybe we can open it up to a couple of their friends, see if they're interested." Next thing we know, I've got 12 students showing up every week for personal finance. So
Right.
yeah, so it's been really neat. But we're using a curriculum from a very popular, well-known money guy, Dave Ramsey. And if you've ever listened to Dave Ramsey, you know that he very emphatically emphasizes don't go into debt, avoid it, run away.
Pay it off quickly.
Yeah, if you have it, pay it off quickly. And I think we would both, I mean, for the most part, if not entirely, we would agree with him, but we just still felt like, hey, let's have a little bit of a back and forth. Let's unpack this and understand, why, and maybe address is it like a donut where, you know what, it maybe in certain contexts it's fine, but don't overdo it. So, okay, maybe we start with something easy.
Is debt good?
Is debt
bad?
Good? Is debt bad? Is it really okay to use those words to describe
I would
debt?
say probably not, because debt is a financial instrument. It's not a moral behavior. Mm-hmm. It's not some value judgment of who you are and what you believe is right in the world. It's just lending money from one party to another.
Yeah, so I think a good way to talk about it would be using words like wise or wisdom. Is it wise to have debt or not? Or is it helpful or hurtful? And maybe at a higher level, even talk about it from the standpoint, which is what we'll get into a little bit of the risk. And is it ultimately what this boils down to is when you take on debt, you are taking on a certain amount of risk with that debt. Is it worth that risk for whatever it is that the debt is getting you?
Yeah, and the use of the terms good and bad is usually around characterizing what types of debt. So let's start there. What types of debt should you divide into separate categories? So, and then we'll kind of label those categories, not necessarily good or bad, but maybe
okay, let's talk about
something else. Wise and unwise? Is that?
Unwise, wise, or maybe we talk about it in terms of like, is it
neutral?
Is it worth it? Is this debt worth it? Okay. So consumer debt. Think putting something on the credit card, buying the TV on their installment plan, that kind of a thing.
The vacation, the additional items,
and just to be
kind
clear,
of what you're thinking of funding here with the credit card and carrying a balance. Thank
you. I was going to say, not just use it and then pay it off, right? Like Dave Ramsey, assuming he hasn't changed, he would say, don't even own a credit card.
Right.
Okay, that I would say that's kind of silly. I get his point, but you're not, just because you have a credit card doesn't mean you have debt. But if you carry the balance, okay, is that worth it, Russ? Is that worth it?
One of the things you pointed out here is that it seems silly. And his argument is that you need to do something that's irregular if you want irregular performance.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to be like everyone else, you need to do something differently. And if everyone is using their credit cards and overspending, that's his argument, is that if you have this credit card and you're using it to get points, then you're probably likely using this additional capacity in your budget to overspend.
Yep.
And you're not making wise choices. You're using that as your first category of expenses instead of paying yourself, funding your retirement, funding your savings at appropriate levels for your income. You're just actively paying off this credit card and spending too much money.
What about though the notion of using that card though to fund it? If you are going to carry a balance, you are going to have interest on the furniture, the TV, the vacation, the computer. Is it worth Is it worth it, right? And the risk is, and what you're doing is you're borrowing against your future, and you're paying an interest rate. So that TV that costs $1,000, really you're paying, $1,200 for it, or something like that. So you're paying more for it than it actually costs. Is that
You're getting it
worth
sooner than you would.
Yeah, and your future self is going to have to pay for it. Right now, it feels like, man, I want this right now. But guess what? 18 months from now, there's something else you're going to want, except that you're already paying on the one TV, and now that's a frustrating place to be in. So is that worth it? Is it worth the risk? Is it worth that situation? Worth the extra money to have this stuff that you would like to have?
For consumer debt,
Yeah.
I would say probably not. Pretty easily say probably not, because the relative benefit from the stuff compared to the relative cost of a credit card, which has the highest rate of the debts that we're going to talk about, is not worth it.
Yeah. So what's a good alternative? And I agree. I think, not worth it. So what's the alternative to using the card, financing the consumer purchases?
Good alternative is to not get the stuff, or to. I don't want to say don't get the stuff. I would say wait. I would say
until you can pay cash. Right?
I would also say spend money on things that are important to you actively, and also actively cut money where things are not important to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't overspend on something that isn't important to you, Josh. That's what I would say.
Yeah. So I agree. I think a general principle, consumer debt is almost always, if not always, going to be not worth it, and a bad idea. Not to say that you're morally wrong for doing it, but it's just you're not making the best use of your cash flow and your dollars by leveraging the debt.
Pretty easily to label that as unwise.
Yeah.
Let's slide down the scale a little bit here. So increase the ticket of the purchase and take a little less interest to make the conversation a little more active. Here I'm talking about vehicles. Should you finance your vehicle? This is a larger purchase than your $1,000 television. This is a $10,000 vehicle, a $15,000 vehicle, a $25,000 vehicle.
Yeah. Okay.
Should you finance
a vehicle?
The interest rate is going to be less.
Okay, so let's talk about. Let's just talk about
At
some
the same
reasons.
Credit score.
Yeah,
which is a whole nother conversation.
So the risk. Well, one of the biggest risks with financing a vehicle in particular is how quickly they depreciate, especially if we're talking about a brand new car. So,
yes, and I think you mean decline in value.
Yeah. If you listen to the most recent episode on depreciation, or a recent, I don't remember where it was in the order. Yeah, you know what we're talking about. So yes, the car is going to decline in value by a certain percentage. Let's say you buy a $50,000 car, and the minute you drive it off the lot, it might have depreciated by $5,000, $10,000 or more. A used car might not depreciate quite as fast, but it's still going to go down in value. I mean, in a lot of cases, most cases, right when you buy it, because you're paying a retail price, and you can't turn around and sell it for a retail price. Plus, you're paying tax on it, and and other things, maybe dealer fees. So you're going to take a financial hit right out of the gate. That's bad. Okay, because you are what's called upside down in your car. You have negative equity, and if something happens, let's say you total that car, the insurance company is not going to give you full retail, go buy a brand new replacement. They're going to give you what? Fair market value. So you're not even insuring the full value of what you financed, and then so they're going to give you, yo $50,000, they're going to give you $35,000. Or you decide, man, this is the wrong car for me, or life circumstances have changed and I need to get rid of this car. Well, you're stuck. Yep. That's bad.
That's bad. And there are some things you can do there around what type of insurance do you have? Do you have the coverage that you need?
Yep. You can get a gap policy.
All kinds of things to do there. But in general, if you have the typical standard coverage and you owe more on your vehicle than its fair market value worth, and you're going to be upside down and out of luck.
Okay, so what if let's use that $50,000 car though.
Okay.
What if I put half down? I put $25,000 down. It's not
that helps your situation
that fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what if my argument for doing so, because this was the question I was presenting to Ross earlier, is let's say a client comes to you or a friend or somebody says, I have $50,000 cash that I can buy a car with. But the dealer is offering a 1%, maybe even a 0%, but let's just to keep it really easy, 1%. I'll put $25,000 down, so I don't have any negative equity. I have positive equity. And I'm going to take, instead of paying and then that remaining $25,000, I'm going to go and invest it. And at least as of the recording of this podcast, it should be you're relatively easy. You're not having to take on very much risk to earn more than 1% interest on that $25,000 investment. So why not do that? Or should you do that? So what are your thoughts on that?
My general approach to all my financial advising is to lay out what options you have and the outcomes of those options. And so if you're asking me to give you a what would you do, or a specific piece of recommendation, we would first do the evaluation on if you do A, if you do B, if you do C, and here's why I'm leaning one or the other. Mm-hmm. So in general, that's how I approach the situation. So if you pay down this full $50,000 and purchase the vehicle with cash, you're the only one taking the risk on the vehicle. There's no other party involved. And I would say there's a big benefit to that outside of just sorry, I'm getting a call here.
The disruption, people.
Outside of just the financial gain of, earning 3% on the CD or whatever investment that you got and paying 1% to the bank, there's a reason that 1% is set by the bank. It's relative to the risk that you're taking and that they're taking. So I would say at that point, it's not worth the game of trying to move money around at such a small amount. Just pay it off, own the vehicle outright, and move on.
Okay.
Find other ways to make bigger decisions.
So let's put a pin in that conversation and let's shift to a different category, which is a house. You're going to pay cash for a house. I mean, you're going to tell there are not many people out there that are going to tell you don't buy a house until you can pay cash for it. I mean, you might get people, and I'm fairly confident this is the Dave Ramsey approach as well, is if you're going to finance it, stick to a 15-year mortgage maximum.
Yes.
Okay, so that's fine, but still, you're taking out a loan. You're borrowing money. So
yes.
If debt is bad, and this is kind of the point here, right? If debt is bad, well then it doesn't matter what it's for. It's bad. So if we're going to say, well, in certain circumstances it's acceptable, i.e. or e.g. when purchasing a house. When you're buying a house, it's acceptable. Well, why is that? Why is it
What's
acceptable?
What's the difference between a vehicle and a house?
Are you asking me what's the
I think
difference?
that's what you're asking here is what are those times when it is acceptable and what are those times when it's not acceptable? Because debt is just an instrument.
Right.
It's not a good thing or a bad thing.
Right.
It's how you
It's a tool.
use it or abuse it that
Right.
makes your choices wise or unwise.
Yeah.
So typically, real estate, homes, residences appreciate in value. Cars decline in value. Mm-hmm. So that would be a major difference of why I would say it's a wiser decision to borrow money for a home than to borrow money for a vehicle.
Yeah. And that is, yeah, you nailed it, right? That's the general consensus. The common wisdom, let's say, is homes appreciate in value, or even if it doesn't, even if it stays the same, it's not often going to depreciate, and certainly not at the rate that like a car would. Okay. And so therefore,
Yeah. Huge
you're
caveat
better
there.
off, and you have to live somewhere, and homes are really, really expensive. And so how long will it take you to save up 2, 3, 400,000 or more, depending on what market you're in?
Yeah.
Those are all the reasons why it's like, okay, yeah, we can justify taking a loan out to buy a home.
But one of the things that you just kind of pointed out a little bit there is that there is this potential for a decline in value. If you're buying at the top of the market and it falls out from underneath you like it did in 2007, 2008, then you're going to be upside down on your home just the way that a lot of people were in the situation that you were talking about earlier with a vehicle. So there is still a risk, which is why I would say you can minimize that risk by decreasing the amount of time that you're owing on the property.
Yeah.
And that acceleration of the time will also help you get over the curve on the principal to interest ratio quicker. And so that as you're making those payments on the 15-year, it's accelerating the process and decreasing the amount of interest that you're paying with each additional payment. And so you're progressively adding up that snowball of principal relative to the payment that you're making. And it happens on a much shorter scale when there's half of the time.
Last category, I own a business, and I'm going to borrow money to purchase equipment, to expand our enterprise, whatever. I'm going to borrow money as a business to operate as a business. And the thinking is, I'm gonna borrow this money at X amount of interest, but I'll be able to infuse that capital into my company, which will increase profitability and therefore increase the value of or increase the value of the business.
Yes.
So justifiable, kind of based on that same notion of the house. That, I mean, is this?
It's going to turn it into income-producing property because you're going to go out and in your hands, it's worth more than it is in the hands of anyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a strong argument there. It's also a strong argument that you're already taking a lot of risk by being self-employed, by owning a business, and the more you leverage this debt, the more risk you're taking.
Yeah.
And so you need to be very careful when you're self-employed that you're taking out the right debt, you're not taking out too much, and that you're watching it, knowing that you're getting the benefit out of it that you need.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go. I want to do two things. I want to tie this now back to the car and really use it to share like my final, what I would say is sort of an overarching position and approach to debt, and then you wrap up with yours, and then we'll talk about what we've been listening to, and we will call it a day.
All right.
So the buying the house, the business debt. The idea there is, it's a risk equation. We're saying there's a certain amount of risk that I'm willing to take on, and in those instances, the rationale is, well, I'm either going to increase profitability or value, particularly with the case of the business owner, and maybe even the case with your personal resident real estate, or it's low because low interest rate relative to and I'm paying down, I'm building equity in my home, even if the value does not increase, I'm still building equity
that
by paying.
Would be
paying
losing if I were paying rent.
Right.
Okay.
But underlying in all of that is a recognition that, sure, while that might be true, the house, something could happen to the house. Property values could go down. You still could get in a bind where you've lost your job and you can't make the payment. Now you're going to default. The business goes under. Any number of factors could change. And so in all of these situations, you essentially are making a calculus to determine, is this risk of the debt worth the outcome? I would say with the car, it's kind of the same thing. If you have, if you're borrowing for a car, okay, and I think that most of the time somebody's borrowing for a car, let's just be honest, it's because the car that they want probably exceeds the amount of cash that they have to purchase it. So is that bad? I again wouldn't necessarily say that it is. I would say that if I were looking at their financial statement and I saw what is your cash flow, What are your assets? Essentially, what is your ability to absorb the risk of this debt if something goes wrong? And if it's relatively low, and again, this is very subjective, right? What's relatively low even mean? But I think that there's a place in there that you could justify, something like that. But you have to also at the same time recognize, okay, I'm leveraging my future. I'm borrowing money. I'm taking on risk. Why? Because I really want this car. And is that really what you want to do with your money? I'm not necessarily going to talk you out of that like I would financing the big screen TV. But I think you just have to really be careful with something like that. So my overarching argument is, if your financials are strong enough to support or to absorb a debt, I think that's acceptable. But you still have to take into consideration, okay, what is the long-term impact of this? And in most cases, consumer debt and vehicle debt, it's not worth it.
I would say something very similar. Just walking through the scale here. Consumer debt, avoid as much as you can. Vehicle debt, pay it down quickly if you have to use it at all. Home debt, don't buy too much home.
Yep.
Don't buy it for too long. Most mortgages don't make the 15-year mark. So,
yep.
Then the last thing I would say on the business debt is watch it carefully and know that you're getting the profitability that you need to exceed the risk that you're taking by taking on that new debt.
Yeah.
And then progressively pay it down so that you're in a better position to cash flow your life out of the business instead of someone else's loan.
And if you feel like after this conversation, you're like, well, but wait, so I still don't really know, should I or shouldn't I? I think that you feel exactly the way that we want you to feel, which is it's really difficult. And I think it's easy for somebody like Dave Ramsey to say, no, never, don't do this, don't do this. And he sells lots of books and has a great radio show. And I think he's a fantastic voice of reason and advice for how to approach money and finance. Absolutely. But the problem with somebody like him compared to somebody like us is that we get into the nuanced details of somebody's situation, and that changes that a little bit.
Yes.
All right. What have you been listening to?
Okay, Josh. I have been listening to a Spotify playlist called Dad Rock.
Dad Rock.
Dad Rock, and it's all the things that you would expect. Journey, Rush, Tom Petty.
So like the dad rock that your dad listened to.
It would be.
Yeah. Not that you didn't, but those were that's
that you
your
would expect
dad's generation.
Any dad, really, to have this on a playlist somewhere.
Any living father.
In general.
Yeah, maybe.
Like as soon as you have a baby, they hand you this playlist.
Anyone older than 30, perhaps.
That's right.
That sounds not too dissimilar from the playlist that you curated for your daughter.
It's
similar.
Probably
a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
But just maybe yours expands beyond rock.
Yeah, it does. The one for Jenny has some. It does have some country. It does have some pop music.
Yeah.
But this one is really leaning in. Father's Day just ended yesterday.
Yeah.
So
nice.
Here we go. What about you? What have you been listening to?
My younger daughter, Lila, she is wearing a shirt that is a hand-me-down from my older daughter, Maylee. And it's a super cute shirt on her, and it's a David Bowie shirt, and so she had it on yesterday, and I said, "Hey, do you know any? And do you know any? Can you name any songs?" And she said no, she couldn't name any of his songs. So can you sing any of his songs? No. I'm like, okay, well, we better get you educated then. Now the thing is she did recognize when I started playing some, she recognized them, and I knew that would be the case. But I played several songs, and I said, okay, so if you're gonna wear the shirt, you gotta know who the person is. You have to know their music. Don't be a poser.
At least their top 5.
Yeah. At least you need to be able, when somebody says, hey, name one of their songs, you need to be able to say, oh, well, how about Under Pressure? Boom. Nailed it. So we were jamming to some David Bowie hits.
Awesome. That's a fun bonding experience.
Yeah, it probably is on your dad playlist.
It probably is. It probably is. So.
All right.
Well,
man.
Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah. Stay out of debt. See you next time.